Did you know that there was a time in American history, especially a time of deep racism and discrimination, when African Americans built their own ideal world away from the horrors of racial vices? These resilient Black Americans came together to build something extraordinary, the first Black Wall Street, which was a place where Black lives thrived without the shackles of systematic racism as we know it today. But then, in a shocking turn of events, a white mob reduced this thriving community to ashes in 1921. This wasn't just a tragedy, it was a horrifying act of white terrorism and a dark chapter often overlooked in history books and ignored in schools. From mass murder to the destruction of Black properties worth billions of dollars, in the absence of justice for the victims, we'll be exposing the sad reality of how Black Wall Street was destroyed. So join us as we unravel the untold story of how destructive white mobs left behind a haunting legacy that still echoes throughout the decades. In 1916, the Greenwood community in Tulsa, Oklahoma implemented a residential segregation ordinance, which barred one race from residing on a block with over 75% residents of another race. This segregation was justified by the so-called Jim Crow laws that were prevalent in the United States at that time. These laws enforced racial segregation and restricted the rights of African Americans. Tulsa's ordinance was one of many such laws that aimed to control where Black people could live and work based on their race. Despite attempts to keep Black people separate from white society, the ordinance inadvertently paved the way for a paradise where Black people could flourish. And ironically, the law intended to limit the Black community ended up having the opposite effect. Ottawa W. Gurley, a wealthy African American from Arkansas, played a crucial role in establishing the influential Black Wall Street community. In 1906, Gurley bought over 40 acres of land in Tulsa and specifically sold it to fellow African Americans. This gave rise to a flourishing and dynamic community that would later be recognized as Black Wall Street. Also referred to as Greenwood, it offered a haven for Black individuals to reside and work without the fear of oppression, racism, or the menace posed by the Ku Klux Klan, KKK, an extremist group that emerged in the early 1900s and frequently targeted African Americans, subjecting Black residents to intimidation and attacks. For those who had migrated from the harsh conditions of Mississippi, Black Wall Street was a refuge where they could enjoy a life free from the discrimination and violence they had experienced in the South. Within this dynamic community, Black people had the opportunity to establish businesses, own properties, and enjoy freedom. It served as a sanctuary in a country that remained divided among racial and class lines. Due to segregation laws, the inhabitants and enterprises of Black Wall Street became closely interconnected, with Black residents exclusively patronizing Black-owned businesses. This fostered a flourishing autonomous community in which Black individuals engaged in intra-community commerce. As a result, the region became an economic powerhouse with currency flowing unrestrictedly within the community. Each dollar entering the community had the potential to circulate an impressive number of times before exiting. On average, a dollar remained within the community for almost a year, which is an impressive achievement considering the challenges during that era. Many Black professionals and business owners resided on Black Wall Street, contributing to its success as a vibrant community. Black Wall Street thrived with a range of enterprises and professions. The community was home to doctors, journalists, lawyers, and bankers, along with over 600 businesses. This encompassed a bank, post office, hospital, 2 movie theaters, 21 churches, 21 restaurants, 30 grocery stores, libraries, and even a functional bus system. Alongside the flourishing businesses and professional prospects within Black Wall Street, the community showcased numerous luxuries and amenities. Many homes featured indoor plumbing, which was rare in the early 1900s. There was also a strong school system that offered exceptional education for black children, often surpassing the quality available elsewhere. Black Wall Street prosperity was further underscored by the presence of 6 affluent black females who owned planes, which was quite uncommon in a state with just 2 airports. This distinction positioned Black Wall Street as one of the most affluent African American communities in the USA at that time. The success of Black Wall Street led to rapid population growth, with its population reaching over 10,000 people in 1921. The economic opportunities with high quality of life drew black people from all over to settle in this thriving community. While Black Wall Street was thriving, not everyone was happy with its success. The progress and development of the community were seen as a threat by many whites who resented the prosperity of the black community. They felt that the black community was getting above itself and needed to be reminded of its proper place in society. This resentment fueled hostility towards Black Wall Street, and the white Americans were motivated by greed and racism to destroy Black Wall Street and take away the livelihood of black African Americans at the slightest opportunity. On a fateful day in May 1921, a single event changed the course of Black Wall Street's history forever. This event devastated the community, leaving it in ruins. The tragedy commenced with an accusation against Dick Rowland, a 19-year-old black shoe shiner, of assaulting Sarah Page, a 17-year-old white elevator operator in a nearby building. At the Main Street Shine Parlor, where Dick Rowland worked, there were no segregated bathrooms, so his employer had arranged for his black employees to use the colored bathrooms on the top floor of the nearby Drexel building. On his way to the bathroom, Rowland encounters Sarah Page, who was operating the elevator at the Drexel building, and immediately after Rowland entered the elevator, she screamed. One possible explanation for Sarah's scream was that as Rowland entered the elevator, he lost his balance and instinctively reached out to steady himself by grabbing Sarah's arm. Startled by this sudden movement, Sarah screamed in fear. In this scenario, Rowland's actions were accidental, and Sarah's scream was not necessarily an accusation of wrongdoing. However, Rowland understood the gravity of the situation he was in and immediately fled the building. Once he had fled, a clerk from Rimberg's clothing store hurried over to her to inquire about the incident. When Sarah Page informed him that she had been assaulted by Rowland, he promptly called the police to report Rowland for rape. The next day, Rowland was arrested at his mother's house in the Greenwood district. The arrest of Rowland sent shockwaves through the community as they were afraid that he might be lynched. The tragic events that unfolded in Tulsa on June 1st, 1921 could have been averted had it not been for an inflammatory newspaper headline published by the Tulsa Tribune. In the aftermath of Dick Rowland's arrest, the Tulsa Tribune released a newspaper with a misleading headline that reads, "Nab Negro for attacking girl at an elevator." The headline was sensational and provocative, and it stoked the anger and resentment of the white community. This resulted in a lynch mob of white men gathering outside the courthouse, demanding that Rowland be handed over to them. Despite Sarah Page's choice not to press charges against Rowland, the decision was ignored by the white mob, further fueling the tense atmosphere. They continued to view Rowland as guilty without any evidence or due process. In response to the growing threat of a white lynch mob, approximately 75 armed African Americans from the Greenwood district went to the courthouse to protect Rowland from being lynched by the white mob. The African Americans were armed with shotguns and pistols, ready to defend themselves and Rowland against any possible attack from the white mob. However, the sight of armed African Americans defending the courthouse was seen by the white mob as a direct challenge. They perceived it as a declaration of war, and they retreated to regroup and gather more white supporters and weapons. They were determined to take back control of the situation and put the African Americans in their place. As tensions reached a breaking point, a white man attempted to disarm one of the African Americans outside the court. In the struggle for the weapon, a shot was fired. The gunshot was the trigger for a full-blown battle to break out, with both sides firing gunshots at each other. The violence was immediate and intense, with no thought given to restraint or reconciliation. In the brutal confrontation, 12 people were allegedly killed, 10 white Americans and 2 black Americans. It was a devastating loss of life, and the full extent of the tragedy had yet to unfold. The white mob vastly outnumbered the black Americans, and they quietly gained the upper hand. The black Americans were forced to retreat as they were met with a barrage of gunfire. The white mob then set upon Black Wall Street, looting and burning businesses, homes, and churches. The attack was ruthless and systematic, and the entire district was destroyed. The Tulsa Race Massacre was a devastating tragedy that left behind a trail of death and destruction. An estimated 300 black people were killed, and more than 10,000 people were left homeless as more than 1,250 homes were burned to the ground. What makes this tragedy of the Tulsa Race Massacre even more heartbreaking is the fact that the survivors and their families were never given the reparations they were owed. Years of black success were erased, and the Tulsa Race Riot Commission recommended that the survivors and their families receive compensation for their losses, but this recommendation was never acted upon to this day. In fact, none of the white mobs were arrested or taken to court as the black community continued to count their losses. The survivors were left to rebuild their lives with little to no assistance, while the total cost of the destruction is estimated to be around $60 billion. Despite the reconstruction of Greenwood District by the black community in 1925, it has never regained the vibrant essence that once defined it as a successful black community. This brutal assault on Black Wall Street goes down in history as one of the United States' most savage and horrific white mob attacks on black community. It underscores the extent of discrimination, jealousy, and racial segregation that persisted during that era and even after the abolition of slavery. This tragic event could have been prevented had everyone collectively embraced their shared humanity and treated each other with love and respect, regardless of race, background, and status. The survivors of this white supremacist terrorist attack have continued to seek justice and reparations to this very day, even as the legal system appears to have tragically failed them.